In the beginning of the Great Northern War, it seemed that Sweden was isolated by its enemies that would soon win the conflict. However, by the middle of 1702, it proved to be anything but, as Charles XII, the soldier king of Sweden, had defeated all of his initial opponents in battle and was close to total domination. As the Swedish victories mounted, so did her enemies' eagerness to dismantle the empire. Just as the King of Poland, Augustus II, was licking his wounds after the defeat at Klisov, the Russian bear came out of its winter slumber and began planning its next attack. The good news is that you don't need a time machine to experience historical epic warfare. The sponsor of this video, Epic War Thrones, is a free-to-play, massively multiplayer, real-time strategy game where millions of players take the role of feudal lords to control a mysterious and wondrous land in a Grand Eastern setting, in control of their progression through expansion, annexation, alliance building, and much more. It combines a gripping strategy campaign of empire building and conquest with thrilling real-time battles. Made in Unreal Engine 4, Epic War Thrones brings PC-level experiences to mobile, allowing you to battle in 3D. There are more than 20 terrain forms and 5 weather conditions, and all of them influence the strategy you need to win. Epic War Thrones' slogan is "Real War, Real Epic", and to that end, the game rejects the pay-to-win model. Every resource is obtainable either through economy or plundering. You command legendary generals to restore history, and each hero has different skills and behavior, making the tactical layer very deep. Support our channel and experience real war in an epic fashion by downloading Epic War Thrones via the link in the description. Following the Battle of Klisov, the Swedish army advanced towards Krakow, while Augustus fled to Sandomierz. The governor of Krakow was unwilling to surrender his city without a fight. However, he changed his mind after a Swedish display of force in front of the city walls. A couple of weeks later, a 12,000-strong Swedish army from Pomerania arrived in Krakow as well. Augustus, seeing the gravity of the situation, left Sandomierz with 4,000 cavalry and advanced towards Warsaw to retake it. He had hoped to call for another diet and gather military and financial support from the nobility. The diet did not go according to his plans though, as an increasing number of noblemen voiced their dissatisfaction with the fact that Augustus involved the Commonwealth in the war. Several noblemen even threatened to openly back Charles in the conflict. Growing more desperate, Augustus sent countless envoys to the Swedish king in the autumn of 1702. However, Charles would not accept any of the terms that were offered. Fearing that all of his offers to Charles would go unanswered, Augustus begged for the aid of his liege via the Electorate of Saxony, the Holy Roman Emperor. Leopold I acquiesced, though his motives were not as selfless as they seemed, as the treaty he offered Charles stipulated that Sweden and Poland would end all hostilities, and that all Saxon troops would leave to join the imperial army in the War of the Spanish Succession. The young king dismissed even this offer, as he was determined to defeat Augustus completely. By 1703, Augustus was forced to flee Warsaw again, while Charles continued consolidating his position in Poland. Although we have neglected this theatre of war for some time, it is time to return to Ingria and Estonia. As Charles turned southwards after the Battle of Nava, Tsar Peter was given some much-needed time to reinforce and improve the Russian army. Boris Sheremetev, the only Russian commander to have escaped after the Battle of Nava, was given command over the Russian forces in the north. Small raids into Estonia and Ingria were conducted regularly during 1701, but they were not decisive by any means. The first serious attempt to probe the Swedish defences in the area was made in September, when Sheremetev led a 7,000-strong army into Estonia. However, von Schlippenbach intercepted the Russian advance with a 3 times smaller army and defeated Sheremetev at Reuj. Sheremetev made another attempt with a much larger army under him and advanced into Estonia again in January 1702. Schlippenbach, this time outnumbered 6 to 1, gave battle at Arestve and was forced to retreat after sustaining heavy casualties. After Erastva, the Russians faced almost no significant opposition in the area and were able to advance deep into Ingria. In the autumn of 1702, the main Russian army, under the command of Peter himself, reached the Swedish fort of Bori. As the Russians had lost all of their artillery at the Battle of Nava 2 years prior, they made an extraordinary effort to replace their lost and outdated artillery pieces, even going as far as to melt down church bells for material. The new Russian artillery corps was quite effective. The Swedish garrison of Bori, although mounting a serious defense, was forced to surrender after heavy bombardment and continuous assaults. The Swedish commander gave Peter the key to the city, which symbolized that Bori was the key to the Neva River. Peter, recognizing that as well, renamed the city to Schlüsselburg and placed it under the command of his most trusted general, Menshikov. The siege, though relatively short, left the Russian army exhausted, and the Tsar's desire to repair and improve the fort gave them some time to recover. Charles was aware of the situation in the north, however he did not see the Russian advances as a significant threat, and continued pursuing his goals in Poland. As the campaigning season of 1703 began, the Russian army left Schlüsselburg and advanced towards the mouth of the river Neva. The mouth of the river was guarded by a fort called Nienkens. Hearing that the Russian army was approaching, the Swedish garrison burned the fort to the ground. Peter the Great captured what was left of Nienkens on the 1st of May, and on the 27th decided to found a new city there, Russia's future capital, St. Petersburg. In order to build the superior city and the fortresses around it, tens of thousands of serfs were forcefully brought to St. Petersburg. Along with them, Peter also invited many architects, engineers and shipwrights from Western Europe to help him build the city of his dreams. These extraordinary efforts seem to have paid off, as by 1704 St. Petersburg began sprawling outwards from the main fortress, and 2 new fortresses were built alongside it. There were several Swedish attempts at reconquering the city in the next few years, however all of them were unsuccessful. Back in Poland, Charles managed to obtain the support of enough of the Polish nobility to have Stanisław Leszczyński crowned as the new king. On the other hand, Augustus still mounted a significant resistance, as he controlled the majority of the Polish army. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth subsequently descended into chaos, as the Sandomierz Confederation, led by Augustus, and the Warsaw Confederation, led by Stanisław, began fighting a brutal civil war. Due to the chaotic nature of the conflict, forts and cities continuously changed hands between the 2 confederations and Sweden, and it's difficult to discern who controlled several parts of the Commonwealth at different points in time. In the summer of 1704, the Swedish fort of Nava fell to the Russian army, after a much more effective blockade and siege than 4 years earlier. It was at Nava that Peter signed a treaty with Augustus, granting the Saxon monarch significant subsidies, 12,000 Russian soldiers, and lands in Ruthenia in exchange for staying in the war. Over the next year, the Russians and Saxons had devised a strategy to defeat the Swedish army and expel Charles from Poland. The Grodno campaign, as it later became known, aimed to capture the Swedish forces in a pincer movement, with a 3-sided offensive from Lithuania, Ruthenia and Saxony. Charles was not sitting idly either, and by the summer of 1705, he had convinced the Diet in Warsaw to start working on a peace treaty and to crown Stanisław as king. As what was going on in Warsaw was seen as a possible catastrophe for Augustus's war effort, not to mention the fact that it represented a significant hit to his pride, he knew that he had to act quickly. A large Saxon cavalry force was sent to assault Warsaw and to stop the coronation of Stanisław. Augustus's reckless endeavour ended in a complete disaster, as the force was defeated by a much smaller Swedish army and its commander was captured. Furthermore, the Saxon commander also divulged the strategic intentions of Augustus and his allies, allowing the Swedes to thoroughly prepare for the upcoming Grodno campaign. As the majority of Livonia and Estonia were under Russian control by the beginning of the campaign, the main Russian army, along with large Saxon and Polish-Lithuanian contingents, set up for winter quarters at the fort of Grodno in Ruthenia. They expected a quick victory over the Swedish army after the campaigning season of 1706 began. However, they did not even get the chance to try. Much like his predecessor, Gustavus Adolphus, Charles force marched his army in the dead of winter and arrived at Grodno on the 24th of January. Lacking the artillery to assault the fort, Charles opted to cross the frozen Neman River and blockade the city. Seeing that the young king was preparing to encircle them, Augustus immediately left with 5,000 men, hoping to reinforce his army in Saxony. Peter, unwilling to bring the rest of his army to relieve the siege, ordered Menshikov to leave the fort with the cavalry as soon as possible. Grodno fell in April, and the Russians lost more than a third of their initial force. They would have lost even more had Charles not misjudged the direction of Menshikov's retreat. Unable to pursue the Russian army through the thick marshlands of Polessia, Charles went westwards to seek a battle with the Saxons. As Charles was busy with the siege, Augustus had prepared to advance towards Warsaw. He led a 7,000-strong cavalry force, while the main body of the Saxon-Polish army was commanded by Schulenburg. A third Saxon army under Brauser was also advancing from Krakow. Schulenburg crossed the Oder on the 8th of February and advanced towards the town of Sława in Silesia. While this was taking place, Reinschild was resting in his winter quarters, which extended from Kostin to the border with Brandenburg. No sooner had he learned of the Saxon advance, he assembled his army and began marching towards the Oder. After discovering the movements of both Schulenburg and Brauser, Reinschild deduced that the two of them planned to avoid open battle with him and join forces at Poznan. To avoid any surprises, the Swedish commander retreated the same way from which he came, and made sure to spread the word at every town and village that he was retreating, and hoping to avoid open battle. Reinschild's information warfare proved successful, as Schulenburg gave credit to the rumors of a Swedish retreat, and decided to pursue the Swedish army instead of advancing towards Poznan. The Saxon general believed that the mere presence of his superior army would be enough to rout the Swedish force. With this strategy, Reinschild achieved two things. He drew Schulenburg's army away from any allied forces, and was able to choose a site of battle that was optimal for the Swedish army's size and composition. Upon both armies reaching the Fraustadt on the 13th of February, Reinschild started arraying his army in battle formation. It was at this point that Schulenburg realized that he had been deceived. However, he had to give battle, as it would have been scandalous for him to retreat with such a superior force. The Saxon force was around 20,000 strong, with around 10,000 Saxon and 6,000 Russian infantry, and 4,000 Saxon cavalrymen. Schulenburg assembled his infantry into two columns, between the villages of Jägersdorf and Roosdorf, and in front of it he placed 31 cannons, 44 mortars, and a chevaux de frise. 2,000 Saxon horsemen were placed on either wing. Reinschild had only 9,400 men at his disposal, with 3,700 infantry and 5,700 cavalry. He placed his cavalry on the flanks, and the majority of his infantry in a single line in the centre, while some Caroleans were also mixed in among the cavalry. Axel Sparre commanded the infantry in the centre, while Humahjelm led the left, and Reinschild himself was in charge of the right. As the Swedish army advanced, the Saxons waited until their enemies were at about 100 paces distance, then they fired all of their cannons and mortars. Although the Swedish army suffered some casualties during this barrage, they did not give the Saxons enough time for another one, as the centre and left started their charge. The Swedish centre's advance was at first checked by the chevaux de frise, However, after less than 15 minutes, the Swedish forces broke through. The Swedes, who were expertly trained at hand-to-hand combat, charged their Saxon counterparts with swords and did not fire a single shot. In spite of being under constant fire, the ferocious Carolean onslaught forced the Saxons to retreat towards the village of Garrison. The Swedish wings had even more success, as the numerically inferior Saxon cavalry began fleeing after just several minutes of fighting. Only a handful of cavalry on the Saxon right, led by Colonel Kospot, mounted a desperate defence. However, they were surrounded and broken after the rest of their wing fell. The Swedish right afterwards came upon the 6,000 Russian soldiers. The Russians had their uniforms turned inside out, as Schulenburg knew that they were inexperienced and Reinschild would target them. Their weakness was revealed though. The Russians fired only one volley at the Swedes before throwing down their arms and retreating behind the wall of spikes. After removing the chevaux de frise there, Reinschild chased down the entire Russian force and massacred them all. As all of the Saxon cavalry had fled, their Swedish counterparts were now free to surround the remainder of the army on all sides. Much like Hannibal almost 2 millennia before him, Reinschild executed a double envelopment perfectly, forcing the remainder of the Saxon army to surrender. And with that, the entire Saxon army, raised with so much toil, care and expense, and which was twice the size of the Swedish army, had been defeated in less than an hour's time. The Saxons lost more than 7,000 men during the battle itself, and had almost all of the rest imprisoned, with the total losses amounting to about 15,000 to 16,000. The Swedes lost around 400 men and also had around 1,000 men injured. Augustus's biggest problem, however, was that the road to Saxony now lay wide open and undefended. Augustus, who linked up with Brausa and had 12,000 men at his disposal, was only 80 kilometers away from Fraustadt when the battle took place. Shocked at the news of his grand army's complete defeat at the hands of an inferior Swedish force, Augustus hastily retreated to Krakow. Since Peter the Great was unwilling to send his army to even relieve the siege of Grodno, there wasn't any hope of Russian aid for them either. After his victory at Grodno, Charles XII turned west to prepare for the upcoming invasion of Saxony. In the next few months, Augustus desperately tried to negotiate a peace with Charles, even offering to split up the Commonwealth between himself and Stanisław. As autumn began, the Swedish armies marched into Saxony and quickly occupied Leipzig. Without any other options, Augustus agreed to all Swedish demands and signed the Treaty of Elternstadt. According to the treaty, he would renounce all of his claims to the Polish and Lithuanian crowns, annul treaties with Russia, and extradite the Swedish traitor Johann Patkul. In order to humiliate his personal enemy, Charles also forced Augustus to congratulate Stanisław on his victory and coronation. In only 6 years, the young and capable Charles XII eliminated 2 of his 3 enemies. The time had finally come that he would turn his attention to Russia. The Great Northern War was entering its most critical stage. Our series will continue in the coming weeks, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.